Today, I want to talk about something that almost all of us have experienced, but most of us don't understand correctly. And that's when life starts to feel unstable. When things that once felt secure begin to shift. When relationships change. When plans don't go the way you expected. When things you thought would hold suddenly don't. And when those moments, the question we usually ask is, God, what are you doing? But what if that's not actually the right question? What if the question is, what was I standing on? Because what feels like chaos might actually be construction. And today we're going to look at what that means when God starts shaking things, not as punishment, not as abandonment, but as part of how He builds something that can actually last. There's something in all of us that wants stability. We want things to feel secure, predictable, solid. We want to know that what we're building our life on is going to hold. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with that desire. God created us with a need for stability. But the problem is not our desire for stability, it's what we attach that stability to. Because a lot of times we build our sense of security on things that were never meant to carry that kind of weight. We build it on people, outcomes, plans, timing, or even how we think our life is supposed to look. And as long as those things are steady, we feel okay. But the moment they shift, we don't feel inconvenience. We feel shaken. Scripture actually speaks directly to this. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 26, it says, "Once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens, so that what cannot be shaken may remain." Wow, what a powerful statement. Because it tells us that shaking is not random, it's intentional. It's not God losing control, it's God revealing what is actually secure. And then Jesus says something similar in Matthew chapter 7. He talks about two people building houses. One builds on rock, the other builds on sand. And what's interesting is both houses were built. Both look stable. Both go through the same storm, but only one remains. Why? Because of the foundation. So let's bring this into real life. When something in your life starts to shake, it's easy to assume something is wrong. But what if shaking is actually exposure? Because here's the truth. A weak foundation doesn't show up in calm seasons. It shows up under pressure. You can build something that looks strong. You can convince yourself it's stable. You can even convince other people it's stable. But pressure tells truth. And sometimes God will allow pressure, not to destroy what you've built, but to reveal whether it can actually hold. This is where a lot of people misinterpret their life. Because when things start shaking, we think, I messed up, or I missed God, something's wrong. But not every disruption is a mistake. Not every shift is a failure. Not every collapse is destruction. Sometimes it's correction. Sometimes it's exposure. Sometimes it's God saying, this can't hold what I'm about to build in you. And if we're honest, there are things we hold on to that feel stable, but they're actually fragile. We build identity on people's opinions. We build security on outcomes. We build confidence on how things are going. And when those things shake, we don't just feel inconvenience. We feel like we're losing something. But what if God is actually removing something that would have failed you later? Foundational work, it's not visible. It's not impressive. It's not celebrated, but it's everything. Because what no one sees is what everything else depends on. And God cares deeply about your foundation. He cares about you, what you believe, what you rely on, what you run to, what defines you. Because if your foundation is off, everything built on top of it will eventually be unstable. And instead of letting you build your entire life on something weak, God will address it, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it feels like a loss. Let's talk about the moments where things don't just shake, they fall, because those are the hardest. When something you thought would last doesn't, when something you trusted fails, when something you built collapses, those moments can feel like devastation, but sometimes they're actually protection. Because it's better for something to fall early than to carry the weight of your future and then collapse later. And that's hard to accept in the moment. Because loss doesn't feel like love in that moment. It doesn't feel intentional. It just feels painful. But God doesn't operate based on how something feels in the moment. He operates based on what will actually sustain you long term. So what do you do when your life feels like shaking? You don't panic. You don't rush to fix everything. You don't immediately assume something is wrong. You step back and you say, God, what are you revealing in my life right now? Because the goal is not to stop the shaking. The goal is to understand it. What is this exposing? What was I relying on? What felt stable but actually wasn't? And instead of trying to rebuild quickly, you let God rebuild correctly. When you understand shaking as part of the process, it changes how you experience it. You stop seeing it as chaos and you start seeing it as clarity. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And you start asking, what is this revealing for me, God? Because God is not trying to ruin your life. He's really not. He's trying to make sure that it's built on something that cannot be shaken. If something in your life feels unstable right now, it doesn't automatically mean that you're off track. It might mean God is strengthening your foundation. And what feels like things falling apart might actually be God realigning something in your life. So as you move through this week, don't just look at what feels unstable. Look at what it's revealing. Pay attention to what feels like shifting, what feels uncertain, what feels like it's not holding the way you expected it to. And instead of immediately trying to fix it or figure it out, bring it to God and ask Him to show you what's underneath it. Ask Him to show you what you've been standing on. Ask God to reveal anything in your life that looks strong on the surface, but isn't actually built to sustain you. And then trust Him. Trust Him enough to let Him rebuild it, even if it takes time, even if it feels slower than what you would want, even if it doesn't look the way you expected. Because a life built slowly and correctly will always outlast a life built quickly and incorrectly. And what God is building in you, it's meant to last. I will see you next time.